Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel, and we continue with David Malka Meshicha. But before we get into it, I just want to remind everybody we are but a few short days away from Tisha B'Av. It's going to be here on Wednesday night to Thursday night. Now, Tisha B'Av is the saddest day on our calendar. As we know, it was the sin of the spies, and then later on it was the destruction of both the first and second temples, and the last tragedy that we saw on this day specifically is when the right-wing Israeli government sent in our own soldiers to clear out Jews from their homes in Gush Katif. As a result of that, all the trouble with Gaza that's been going on over the last few years, that will be a direct result. So yeah, like we said, there is no right, there is no left. It's one big circus. However, just because this is a sad day, just because this is a time of mourning, and it is, make no mistake about it, we will be fasting and we will be mourning and lamenting, it's only because we're not ready for the light that is to come. I will explain. The 17th of Tammuz, for instance. The 17th of Tammuz was the day that Moses came down with the first tablets, Torah Hasod, the Torah of the secret. In other words, the secrets to all the universe. Later on Yom Kippur, that's where he came down with the second tablets, and that was Torah Pshat, the simple text. That is the Torah that we have today. And we have to dig and dig and dig, maybe to get to the Sod, but you don't get to it, right? That is the day that God chose, and everything kind of flipped on its head. So what is the greatness? What is the special thing that happened on our saddest day, the day that the first temple was destroyed? At that moment, when the temple was destroyed, that is when Nishmat Mashiach, the actual neshama of Mashiach, was born into the world. Okay? So in other words, within the darkness, that is where the light can be found. This is like looking into the sun. There's so much light, but if you look into the sun, all you're going to see is darkness. You will go blind, obviously. But it's so bright that you can't see it because our vessels are not refined enough. We are not in tune enough to receive this kind of light. And so it is also with the 10th of Tevet. When Israel could have done tshuva, and yet 2.5 years later, they had to wait until the walls were breached. Just because they're camped around, it doesn't mean anything. You could do tshuva and change your outcome. So I'm very excited for this time. The world as we know it, again, you don't need to be a religious person. You don't need to even read prophecy, although we are and we do. And that's why we're like, yeah, any day now, like any day now. Just if you just open your eyes and see what's going on, it's any day now. Everything is about to flip on its head. And that's why I said these are very, very exciting times. So we will remember the destruction. We will remember all the things that our people went through. We will remember that we've been in exile for 2,600 years since the destruction of the first temple. It has never been the same since then. But we are also looking forward to the coming of Mashiach and to this world, as we've been talking about in the other series. The world has to flip on its head. Before the new age comes in, this reality has to be completely unrecognizable. Everything has to crumble. All governments, all establishments, all institutions, all corruption, all houses of idolatry, everything just goes down, unrecognizable. And this is really what ushers in the end of the messianic age. Yemot Mashiach, the actual days of Mashiach, and then the rebuilding of the temple. Again, Maseh de Adam, and coming from the heavens. In other words, it's kind of that partnership. So like I said, hold on tight. I'm looking forward to it. I'm always hopeful, and I have no qualms about that. Yes, may something happen this Tisha B'Av, absolutely. And even if we don't see it, I believe that it will. But that's just me. In any case, let's get into this. This one's called David and Idolatry. Now, most of us do not know this, but David, king of Israel, the Lord's anointed, requested to engage in idolatry. But all this is for the sake of heaven, so we will explain. It says in Sanhedrin 107a, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, David sought to engage in idol worship during Avshalom's coup, as it's stated in 2 Samuel 15:32. And David was coming to the top, the head, the peak, where he would prostrate himself to God, and behold, towards him came Hushai the Archite, with his garments torn, with the shirt torn, and earth upon his head. Vayhi David ba ad harosh. That's the language in Hebrew. And Rosh, what is translated here as top or peak, means nothing other than idol worship, as stated in Daniel 2:32. Hu tzalma rosha. That image had a head, right? Di dahav, of fine gold. Dahav, zahav, this is in Aramaic. Its breasts and its arms were of silver, its belly and thighs were of copper. Going back to 2 Samuel 15:32, towards him came Hushai the Archite with his shirt torn, and earth upon his head. Hushai said to David, "Shall they say a king like you will engage in idol worship?" David said to him, "It is preferable that they say with regard to a king like me, known to be righteous, that his son will kill him." In other words, is that better? David continued, "It is preferable that he shall engage in idol worship, and the name of heaven shall not be desecrated in public through the murder of a righteous king in this manner." Now, this is a crazy thought, and it's a crazy claim that can be made that, God forbid, David sought to engage in idolatry. The Lord's anointed, the Lord's chosen, the righteous, the humble, the pious, who was holy and wondrous. As they said of him in Psikta Rabati 9, there was no man that was more careful regarding God's commands and had more reverential fear of God than David. As said in Psalms 119:64, "I am a companion to all who fear you and those who keep your precepts." That's right. Who else can say, they're like this with the king of Israel? Anybody that keeps Torah and has fear of God. David was right there with them. And you should know that even though our rabbis taught that a person on a journey is exempt from prayer, anybody even on the derech, let alone if they're fleeing, right? Especially if there was a place of danger on the way. But David would not do so. But even when he was walking, running, fleeing for his life, he would not prevent himself from praying. This man never stopped. He even wrote Psalms as his heart was breaking when he was fleeing up the Mount of Olives from his son Avshalom, who was trying to kill him. Psalms 3, a song of David when he fled from Avshalom his son. More like literally while he was fleeing from Avshalom his son. Same thing, Psalm of David when he was fleeing from Saul in this house and that house in the caves in the desert. While this was happening, while he was in danger, he was singing to God. These are psalms we sing today. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh from Exodus 30 says, "What servant fears his Lord like David? Nevertheless, it was said of him that he requested to engage in idolatry." What is going on here? These are severe claims, and I hope at this point, anybody watching, right, that no one here thinks for a moment that David actually engaged in idolatry, which means there is something the sages are trying to teach us to grab our attention. And let me tell you, it is a magnificent thing to see on a multitude of levels, meaning we got reasons. So going back to verse 15:32 in 2 Samuel, "And David was coming to the top. He arrived at the summit, where he would prostrate himself to God. And behold, towards him came Hushai the Archite with his shirt torn and earth upon his head." Because that's how, it's like they rip their shirts, they take earth. That's a sign of mourning. Like, what are you doing, right? Rashi says, when it said arrived at the summit, at the mountain summit, literally at the peak, where he used to bow down to Elohim, that's what it says in Hebrew, where he used to bow down. Listen, when he used to come to Jerusalem, in other words, let's say he went on a military campaign or wherever, and he came back and he would arrive at that mountain peak, that was the vantage point overlooking where the ark was placed, and he would bow down at that point. The confusion is that, how it says Bamote Aretz, the high places, their high places, the idolatrous nations, they choose the high places, the highest mountain peaks to perform their idolatry. He chose that highest mountain peak because that's where he could see the ark of the Lord. So that's what was going on over there. You understand? So he chose that place, and people will see him like, oh, is he engaged in idolatry right now? So Rashi concludes that this was as simple as the text said it. And he did not engage in idolatry. In other words, he was right there at the same place where he always bows down before the ark. So what is going on here? Since Rashi came 1,000 years after the sage of the Talmud, who said that he maybe did try and engage in idolatry. But again, everybody gives reasons. The Maharsha, Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Halevi Adels, a 14th century Talmud expert in the time of the Achronim, said the following. The intent is not to say that David engaged in idolatry, God forbid, but rather the Talmud alluded to David fleeing to outside the borders of the land of Israel. I want everybody to listen to this. And because of this, it is considered as if he engaged in idolatry. As David said to King Saul in 1 Samuel 26:19, if you are outside the land of Israel, and your rabbis over there in your Orthodox community say, no, don't go to Israel, please give them this. And even write these things down. Ask them yourselves if you don't want to give them the class. And now let my Lord the king hear his servant's word. If the Lord has incited you against me, remember that this is the line that David gave to King Saul, where he got corrected for this line by God inciting him. God said, you say that I'm inciting Saul? No problem. I'm going to incite you twice, right? For real. He will accept an offering. But if the sons of men, cursed be they before the Lord, for they have driven me today from cleaving to the Lord's heritage. What's the Lord's heritage? Land of Israel. Saying, go worship other gods. No one ever said to David or forced David to worship other gods. He never did it, obviously, but no one ever said that, see? Why did it say it right here in the pshat, in the simple text? But David is saying straight up leaving Israel is like worshiping other gods. I'm not talking about, okay. Masechet Ktuvot 110b, it says, the sages taught a person, meaning when you say a person, it's one of Israel, a Jew, should always reside in Eretz Israel, even in a city that is mostly populated by Gentiles, as it was, over the last 2,000 years. And he should not reside outside of Eretz Israel, even in a city that is mostly populated by Jews. The reason is that anyone who resides in Eretz Israel, inside the land of Israel, is considered as one who has a God. And anyone who resides outside of Eretz Israel is considered as one who does not have a God. As it is stated, to give to you the land of Canaan to be your God. Leviticus 25:38. Part of me being your God is you being right here. If you are not here, I cannot be a God to you. These are the conditions. Same thing. I took you out of the land of Egypt, so I can't be a God to you over there. I can't be a God to you in Egypt. I could be a God to you outside the land of Israel, but my goodness, if you could come back to Israel, this is where it's at. And can it really be said that anyone who resides outside of Eretz Israel has no God? Rather, this comes to tell you that anyone who resides outside of Eretz Israel is considered as though he is engaged in idol worship. Where are your priorities? And so it says with regard to David, for they have driven me out this day that I should not cleave to the inheritance of the land, saying, go serve other gods. 1 Samuel 26:19. But who said to David, go serve other gods? Nobody said that. Rather, this comes to tell you that anyone who resides outside of Eretz Israel is considered as though he is engaged in idol worship. I have nothing to add on the matter. Based on this, the Maharsha concludes, when David wished to engage in idolatry, meaning when he was fleeing for his life from his son Avshalom, who was trying to kill him outside the borders of the land of Israel like an idolater. The difference is that when he was fleeing for his life from King Saul, David was not yet crowned king. And so for the sake of pikuach nefesh, he might have had to leave. But now that you are a king, as we read in Sanhedrin 107a, Hushai said to David, shall they say that a king like you will engage in idol worship? In other words, are you going to now flee across the Jordan? which he did, right? I hope this reaches the ears and hearts of my fellow Jews in the diaspora before it's too late. I mean, like I'm saying these things, but then when it happens, it's done. You're not coming. But now we get into the literal sense of idolatry, as that exists in this case as well. And yes, both examples are correct. Like we said, the Torah's got multitudes. The Yad Ramah, Rabbi Meir ben Todros HaLevi Abulafia, a 2nd century Talmud commentator, so he was before the 4th century, says that the meaning is as simple as the text itself, that David wished to engage in idolatry, but not actually to engage in it, God forbid, rather that it should only look as though he is. So we will explain. If you've been following the series, you'll understand where this is coming from. David fled from Avshalom way after the Bathsheba incident. That was one of his punishments, right? As we discussed in many places, even from the simple text, his only sin was against God. Please see last class, David and Bathsheba. Just watch that, for goodness sakes. All these classes, this is vindicating David. To say, if you ever thought anything negative about David, please don't, for your own sake. And this manifests through mar'it ayin, which means perception or appearance. Like how somebody, like, is he doing what I think he's doing? Probably not, okay? Mar'it ayin is a concept in halacha, this is Jewish law, which prohibits certain actions that might seem to the observers to be in violation of the Torah, even if they are in fact permissible, in order to prevent onlookers from drawing false conclusions. This is exactly what happened with how David handled his business. And it was because of this that people began to speak against God's chosen, which reflected negatively on God. Hence, against you alone I have sinned. This is derived from number 32:22. And the land will be conquered before the Lord. Afterwards you may return, and you shall be freed. It literally says clean of your obligation from the Lord and Israel, and this land will become your heritage before the Lord. Vayitem nekiim ma'Hashem u'meIsrael. This is when Moses questioned the fact that, we just read this a few weeks ago, that the tribes of Reuben and Gad chose to remain on the east side of the Jordan because they had an abundance of livestock, like greater than all of Israel. And they're like, we need the space. This is great land for our livestock, so we want to put it here, right? But Moses thought that meant that they were not going to come into the land of Israel and help their brethren clear the land. That was not so. The tribes made it abundantly clear that was not at all their intention to leave their brothers to fight alone. They swore that all the men, all the fighting men, they would leave there their women and children and their livestock, and all the men would not return home to their wives and children until every last tribe was settled in their designated place. Then they were, blessed, right? So you see, good intentions, questionable appearance. Now, granted, we're always commanded to give our fellow the benefit of the doubt, but why even put them in that situation of doubt to begin with? Because it's almost like you're causing somebody to stumble, even though the law prohibits it on both ways. Don't do anything that'll cause mar'it ayin, that'll cause somebody to question what you're doing. And on the other side, the person always has to give you the benefit of the doubt. For instance, on the story with Joseph, when it said that Joseph spoke evil against his brothers, he actually had evil speech against his brothers to his father. If you read the Midrash over there, it was a Friday night, and they were working in Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, and they created an animal. Now, digging into it deeper, when you create an animal in Sefer Yetzirah, the animal has no soul. It doesn't even have any sustenance. You can eat an entire cow that you created, and it won't fill you up because it's nothing. And it only lasts for 24 hours, whatever kind of being you create. So they were creating animals, and they were just taking bites into them. Again, no feelings, no emotions, no nothing, just like an image of an animal, okay? That's it. And they were taking bites out of the essentially live animal. Now, we know part of the 7 Noahide laws is that you cannot eat from an animal while it's still alive. So it might have caused Joseph to stumble, except the fact that Joseph also should have known better. He was obviously the preferred son of Jacob. All he did was learn Torah. He messed up over here. He absolutely should have gone over to them, say, what are you guys doing? Oh, we just created this lamb. You want to bite? They're like, oh, you guys are crazy. And that would have been the end of it. But he said, hey, they're ochlim evel min achai. We can't do this, right? So it's like, what? You don't know us? Like, this is a mishpacha of tzaddikim. Of course they would not do that. Nevertheless, now we got other examples, okay? All right, case in point. And I've given this example before in years, modern day, right? If an Orthodox Jew goes into a non-kosher restaurant just to use the restroom. So you got a guy, let's say, like not just with a kippah, but the black and white with the twirlies and everything with the payas, and he's going to some bar in Tel Aviv because he has to use the restroom and he's really got to go, so he just goes in there. Anybody, it's like it's innocent, right? But the way that a person from the outside would look at this is like, okay, he clearly doesn't take his faith seriously, thereby causing scrutiny upon that specific community, okay? In the world, it's any Jew, and here in Israel, it's particularly the Haredis. That is why being a Jew, especially visibly, outwardly, comes with a tremendous responsibility, and one's behavior should show as much since you are representing God. I can't even begin to tell you the Chilul Hashem done by certain Haredi individuals in politics. I say politics because politics, as far as I'm concerned, throw it all out. Anybody that's there, no place in society. So I have secular friends, for instance. You just give them an excuse to hate on Haredim, all right? But they look at the corrupt politicians. Yes, we got Haredi politicians who have been in prison for embezzlement and now they're back in the government. Only in Israel. Where is the justice? I don't know. But they see this and like, what if that guy represents God with his beard and this big kippah and the black and white? I don't want any part of it. They don't know any better. So they say that. Obviously, I say individuals because there are individuals who are causing this. It's obviously not the entire communities. It's these individuals, and they're bringing a bad name upon God and upon His Torah. This is a problem. Don't give them an excuse. You see, they are going to look for it. Don't give it to them. This is Chilul Hashem, literally desecration of God's name. And that is the second worst thing that you could do after causing others to sin. Now, since David was so aware of appearances, especially since what he was experiencing now with his own son pursuing him was a direct result of the Bathsheba incident. So we need to ask why he chose to have it appear as if he was engaged in idol worship. The people didn't know exactly what had happened over there, nor did they know the connection between what had happened and his current situation. God told David, because you did this, then this is going to happen. But the people didn't know that. David did, right? And so David thought it would be better for people to think that this terrible situation was given to him, that his own son is trying to kill him, put together armies to go and kill his father. So that this situation was given to him by God because he was an idolater, rather than think that God repays good with evil, a king like you see? If people look at David, who is the most righteous, pious, humble, kind, loving king, a champion of Israel, uniting the tribes, fellow to all those who fear God, the Lord's chosen and his anointed, and see his hardships, specifically his own son trying to kill him, because this is like, that's something special. That's not just like he's been sick or this or that, like everybody. Your own son, your own blood, your seed, really. David was afraid that it would cause Israel to lose hope in God. God forbid. You see, that's what his concern. He couldn't care less about himself. So he wanted to give them a reason, something obvious, as to not turn people off from connecting with God. That is the job of Mashiach, by the way, to be invisible and just be a people, God, people. Please, this way, not follow me. No. Not at all. We don't worship Mashiach. We don't worship man. It is between man and God directly. Anything in between, we know where that goes. Meaning, He was happy to completely destroy his own name and the name of his house rather than for people to even have an inkling of doubt in God's name. Innocent? Sure. Noble? Absolutely. But not a great plan, because that would have been worse. Now let's keep reading from the Yad Ramah. And so, of course, David never intended to actually worship an idol, because the main part of the sin of idolatry resides within the heart. It's not only the action, it's what is behind the action. Same thing with mitzvot. If you do a mitzvah without the proper intent, guess what? That is also considered idolatry, because that mitzvah, without the proper intent, you think it's going to God, it goes to the sitra achra every time. If I took this, I already said a blessing, mind you. Okay, so if I say, that doesn't help me. This water does not sustain me. It does not refresh me. It does not benefit me. It's like I did what I had to do, but really the thing was to quench my thirst. But if I focus on what this is and what this can actually do and how it can actually, lubricate the dryness that is in my throat and give me sustenance to continue to learn and to teach Torah and to speak godly things, and with that intent, I say a bracha, then that goes to God. Anything but that goes to the sitra achra. So it's not that far off, okay? It's intent. So we've discussed this within past teachings, such as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were being threatened by Nebuchadnezzar to bow down to the idol. Now we know that all the congregation of Israel bowed down to that idol. And we've already discussed this in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. There was a class, I'm sorry, I don't remember which class it was, but you could look it up. Bowing down to that idol, or just kneeling, doesn't mean you worship the idol, it means you bow down to the idol. That is not idolatry, okay? In other words, they did not engage in idolatry, but that wasn't the point. These three and Daniel, they were the closest advisors to Nebuchadnezzar. They were his inner circle. He loved them. He protected them. But his people, any excuse, like, these three guys are not doing it. You made a public decree. They're disrespecting you, the crown. They're disrespecting Babylon. What's going on? You got to do something, king. He came to them in secret. He said, listen, just take the knee. That's it. You don't have to kiss it. You don't have to, nothing. Just bow down and that's it. Just for appearances. You don't have to worship the statue. Otherwise, I got to throw you in a fiery furnace. Right? Your lives could be spared. They rejected that deal, not on account of worshiping an idol, but for the fact of honoring God's name. What would it look like if the best of the Jews would bow before an idol, even under the threat of fire? So they chose death over Chilul Hashem. And them choosing a painful death over the appearance of idolatry, the appearance of doing something that you're not supposed to do. Again, not idolatry, just the appearance of. And under duress, mind you. That is what honored God's name. In fact, if they would have been burned, if God would not have sent his angel Gabriel, the angel of fire, to walk amongst them over there. Again, Gabriel's throughout the story of Daniel. They would have ascended to the highest realm in the heavens. Chaye olam haba, life in the world to come. If you do this for God's name's sake, nothing stops you. You don't even get resurrected during the great day of judgment to be judged. You are all spirit. You're coming here, no judgment, you're done already. The sin of the golden calf, pushed by Yanis and Yambres, the two sons of Bilam, the leaders of the Erev Rav, while all of Israel shared the guilt. We're still struggling, right? 17th of Tammuz, that's what happened. Because they did not stop it from happening, though if you read into it, most of Israel had no idea what was going on. How many from Israel were actually guilty of engaging in idolatry, in other words, from their hearts? 3,000. We have the number, Exodus 32:28. The sons of Levi did according to Moses' words. On that day, some 3,000 men fell from among the people. And those were only the ones who accepted idolatry in their hearts, who kissed the idol. That's 3,000 out of almost 3 million people, right? And yet all of Israel paid the price. This is why Hushim came to him and said, this might somehow be acceptable for the sake of heaven if you were any other person, for whatever reason. but you are David, king of Israel, and the Lord's anointed. I know you want to do this for the sake of heaven. I get it. Noble. To give the appearance, but surely this plan will backfire since the people will follow your example, David. You forgot about that. Instead of defending and protecting God's name, you might actually end up bringing people into idolatry as a result. Everybody knows that you have a wayward and rebellious son, David, and the Torah speaks of even how these situations come about. In other words, we understand. We get it. It's okay. Deuteronomy 21:15. If a man has two wives, one beloved and the other despised, and they bear him sons. Now, achat ahuva, v'hachat snu'ah. Lisno is to hate. Okay? Despise, hated. We need this word, so focus. And the beloved one and despised one, the firstborn son from the despised one. Then it will be on the day he, the husband, bequeaths his property to his sons, that he will not be given the son of the beloved wife birthright precedence over the son of the despised wife, the real firstborn son. Rather, he must acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the despised wife, and give him a double share in all that he possesses, because he, the firstborn son, is the first of his strength. Reshit ono. That's exactly what Jacob's blessing to Reuben. Then he has the birthright entitlement. Now, David married the mother of Avshalom. Her name was Ma'akah bat Talmi, the daughter of Talmi, who was the king of Geshur, for purely political reasons, to help establish his kingdom while he was still ruling from Hebron. The very definition of a despised wife. He didn't hate her, okay? But he certainly did not love her the way one does the wife of his choosing, the wife that he was always meant to be with. We can see this example from Jacob and Leah, Genesis 29:30-31. And he came also to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel. So in other words, he also loved Rachel more than Leah. So here it's already saying he loved Leah, but he loved Rachel more. Why? Because Rachel was his actual soulmate. And he worked with him yet another 7 years. And the Lord saw that Leah was hated. So he opened a room, but Rachel was barren. In other words, clearly Jacob did not hate Leah. But compared to the love that he had from his actual soulmate, it almost seemed like he hated. You and I, seeing this, you would not be able to tell the difference between them. Okay? But we're talking about tzaddikim on such high levels, they got it. So it hurt, right? But because Rachel was Jacob's mate from the 6 days of creation, much like Bathsheba was to David, his mate from the 6 days of creation, their love was incomparable to anything else. Right after the Torah discusses the wayward son, it goes on to discuss the product of such a union. And again, we're not speaking of a righteous woman such as Leah, but rather a political marriage for a strategic gain, which was something that has been done throughout the ages. In every kingdom, in every empire, throughout the world, throughout history till this very day, there are political unions. If a man has a wayward and rebellious son, meaning coming from one who is hated, right? In that sense. If a man has a wayward and rebellious son who does not obey his father and his mother, and they chasten him, and he still does not listen to them, his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city and to the gate of his place. And they shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is wayward and rebellious. He does not obey us. He is a glutton and a guzzler. And all the men of the city shall pelt him to death with stones, and he shall die. So shall you clear evil out from among you, and all Israel will listen and fear. In other words, Avshalom, the moment you come after your any father, let alone the king of Israel, let alone King David, you're marked for death, buddy. So again, Hushai was telling David that we all know that he was wayward. We all know this, dude, obviously. And by owning up to this will be a better lesson for Israel rather than them seeing you bow down to idols or even think that you are. Meaning the reason your son is trying to kill you is because the marriage situation and not for any other reason. And if a man is a righteous man and he makes a mistake, that should absolutely be known to show the power of tshuva, as was the case with David. That's why we said, just please, again, last class, this is why. The Malbim, in his book Eretz Chemda, writes regarding David, who saw that there was a decree placed upon him that he would die by the hand of his son. Now, if you recall a few weeks ago in our teaching titled The Shadow of Death, we discussed this matter. We said in Masechet Brachot 7b, and Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, the existence of wayward children in a person's home is more troublesome than the war of Gog and Magog, as it is stated a Psalm of David when he fled from his son Avshalom, Psalms 3:1. And it is written thereafter, Lord, how numerous are my enemies, many have risen against me, Psalms 3:2. While concerning the war of Gog and Magog, which is alluded in the previous psalm, Psalms number 2, it is written, why are the nations in an uproar? And why do all the peoples speak for naught? The kings of the earth shall stand up, and the rulers take counsel all together against the Lord and against his anointed. He that sits in the heaven laughs. The Lord mocks them. Psalms 2:1-4. Yet in this chapter, describing the war of Gog and Magog, how numerous are my enemies is not written, as it is not as difficult as raising a wayward son like Avshalom. Rabbi Shimon ben Avishalom said in a parable. What is this similar to? To a person about whom a promissory note was issued, stating that he must repay a debt to the lender. Before he repaid it, he was despondent, worried how he would manage to repay the debt. After he repaid it, he was glad. So too was the case with David. When the Holy One, blessed be he, told him through Nathan the prophet after the incident with Bathsheba, behold, I will raise up evil against you from your house. God told him very clearly what would happen. So everybody knew that this was coming. 2 Samuel 12:11. David was despondent. He said, perhaps it will be a slave or a mamzer who will rise up against me in my house, a person of such lowly status who will have no pity on me. But once David saw that Avshalom was the one through whom the prophecy was to be fulfilled, he rejoiced, as he was certain that Avshalom would show him mercy. He did not, right? Now, back to the Malbim. When David saw that his son was trying to kill him publicly, he knew that this would desecrate the name of heaven because he was such a righteous man, though he did full tshuva for the incident with how he handled Uriah. He was still due a heavy punishment. And so he thought it would be better to be considered an idolater and for people to think that that is why his son is trying to kill a man such as he. All this, we said, was for appearance alone. The Ramah of Pano said, the righteous receive their heavenly judgments publicly, as was the case with David, so that people should be bewildered from how many songs and praises he sang despite not saving him, to the point where he became Mashiach. In other words, he was pressed and pressed and pressed, and even in his worst times, he didn't lose that song. That's why he became Mashiach. Meaning David was told that he would die by the hand of Avshalom. He was told, this is happening. And he accepted his fate. This does not mean that he just sat there waiting to die. You're also not allowed to do that, right? That would be a direct violation of the Torah, as one should rise to kill the one who comes to murder him. Hakam habalo gecha hashkem leolgo. But he didn't want to kill his own son, and he didn't want to allow his son to kill him because then there would be no redemption for his son. He loved his son after all. So David fled in order to preserve life. And on his way to what he believed could be certain death, he wholeheartedly praised and worshiped God, running up the Mount of Olives, tears running down his face, and he was singing to the Lord. Songs of praise, for goodness sakes, without any hope for a different outcome. He wasn't praying for anything different. He's like, if this is what you're giving me, then this is what you're giving me. I love you. Thank you for it. David. And on his way, like we said, still going, David commanded his men not to kill Avshalom very clearly. But Yoav disobeyed that direct command and tossed 3 spears into his heart. David mourned the son who usurped him and tried to kill him. And so it was a bittersweet victory. And all who see this can behold the greatness and righteousness of King David, peace be upon him, who preferred to be ridiculed and destroy his good name by giving the appearance that he engaged in idol worship, so that he alone would desecrate the name of God, and may God's name not be desecrated because of him in public, so that no man should question the actions of the Holy One, blessed be he. As Moses, the faithful shepherd, said, there is no greater than King David. Our takeaway, my friends, is that we must raise our awareness as representatives of God. As David said in Psalms 16:8, I have placed the Lord before me always. Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. If he struggled, it is God. If he faltered, it is God. If he succeeded, it is God. If his own son is trying to kill him, it is God. This is how he lived his life, with that hyper consciousness of who is in complete control of every aspect of creation, from every star in the heavens to gust of wind to blade of grass, to every proton, neutron, and electron. Since he had this consciousness constantly working to expound upon it, his reverential fear was unmatched, and so his number one priority was always his Creator. Just as the Holy One, blessed be he, did for David, the least David could do was to protect God's name, God's honor. We first saw this with his rise to power in 1 Samuel 17:26. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the ranks of the living God? He wouldn't stand for it regarding his own life, and he wouldn't stand for it regarding his own good name. Nothing matters when it comes to God. As his son Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 7:1, the most important thing, a good name is better than good oil. Tov Shem Mishemen Tov, because that's the only thing that no one can take from you. That is something that you earn, that you have to work for. You can't buy it. You need to live it. And he was ready to throw it all away for God's name's sake. David would give his life and his name, meaning his legacy, to defend God's honor. And it would behoove us to take a lesson from his actions, even just a little bit. That is why he is the Lord's anointed. So that's our class. I love this stuff. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Have a meaningful fast. Something big. And have a Shabbat Shalom. Bye.